Drawing and animating this panda is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level.
Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started.
So as usual, the first thing we're going to do is to create a new canvas. Now for reference, these are the dimensions I will be using. It is literally just the size of the iPad screen, but make sure you find something that works for your own project requirements. Now if you're not exactly sure how to pick a canvas size, I have a video in which I teach you everything you need to know in order to make a decision, so I will link that in the description below. But there's one thing to keep in mind though here. If you want to animate your panda, so if you want to have the little chewing animation, you need to make sure your canvas is not too big, otherwise you might have issues exporting it. So I would say smaller than 3000 by 3000 would be good, so dimension of the iPad screen would be perfect for that. And just another thing, I often get questions on how I have the reference image at the top. You just go in the wrench icon menu. Then in the canvas option, you can activate the reference little toggle here, and that's going to let you import an image. So if you want to use my little panda as your reference, I will link it in the description below. It's totally free and it's going to be with the color palette as well. Now you really don't need to download those, they're just there if you feel like you need them, but otherwise I really encourage you to try and pick your own colors because that's really good practice for when you create your own illustrations. Now the first thing we're going to do here is to actually change the background color to honestly whatever dark color you want. I'm going to go with a dark green, and a green that is a bit more on the blue side than on the yellow side. Once you have that, we're going to create a new layer and we're going to rename this one to Sketch. So we're going to start with a super rough, quick sketch. It's going to look terrible, but that's fine. We just want to roughly map out the proportions. And for the sketch, honestly, you can use whatever color you want because we're not going to see it in the final result. So I'm going to go with a neutral gray, as you can see here. And in terms of brushes in this video, I'm always going to be suggesting two different kind of brushes. One is going to be a free brush that comes with Procreate and it's going to allow you to follow along just fine. So seriously, this video is not really about the brushes, so you don't necessarily need anything crazy specific. And the other option is going to be a brush from my Ultimate Illustration bundle. So those brushes, they're not essential, again, I want to make that super clear, but they can help you save some time and just get more professional results overall. So if you want to check them out, they will be linked in the description below, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people. Now here for the sketch, you can really use any brush you know you're comfortable with. A few options could be in the sketching panel, the HB or 6B pencil. Or if you do have the Ultimate Illustration brushes, go ahead and pick the sketching brush, of course. And we're going to start the sketch with just a super simple horizontal line, which is going to be the ground. And then we're going to do two circles, one big one for the body, and then a slightly smaller, maybe flatter one for the head. So you can see here, it really doesn't need to be perfect. Have a bunch of lines, that's totally fine for now. We're then going to mark the direction of the head, so for that you can just draw a slightly curved horizontal and vertical line, which is going to create what I call here the plus sign. We're also going to draw the vertical line on the body to help us with the symmetry, and then we can just go ahead and draw the feet. So we're not really seeing the legs here because the panda is kind of sitting with the legs facing us, so all we see is the feet. And for the feet, I like to just draw big ovals, as you can see here. We're also going to map out the shoulders with smaller ovals that touch the head. And then you can draw the arms in two parts. So the top of the arm is going to be an oval, and the bottom part of the arm, which is going to kind of become the hands as well, is going to be just slightly bigger ovals. And the fact that we're breaking down the limbs like this in super basic shape means you can really simply reposition them. So if you don't want your panda to be holding the bamboo in the same position that I'm drawing, if you want to just have the panda wave or something like that, all you have to do is move the ovals, rotate them, and then just connect them later in the process when we do clean up the sketch. You might also want to map out the face. Well, you definitely want to map out the face. So you can draw a curved line in the middle of your plus sign, so that's going to be the nose. And then two ovals on the side of the nose, aligning them so that they're overlapping the middle horizontal line. So something like that. Those are not the eyes, those are the black spot on the face. And if you want, you might kind of change the shape of the head a little bit to make it heavier and just thicker on the bottom. So not quite oval, but just, you can see on the screen, thicker on the bottom. And you can also draw very nice round ears on the top of the head, maybe mapping out the nose as well, and maybe also going in with a little bit of a mouth here. So all the facial features, honestly all the features, you can experiment. Since we're breaking them out in shapes, basic shapes like I was saying, you can easily change anything at this point. So feel free to go off-road, off-track, and change your Panda so it matches what you have in mind. You can also use the arrow tool, setting it to either uniform or distort if you want to resize, rotate, or distort your Panda. So here it's really a question, like I was saying, of figuring out the proportions of everything. So just making sure that if the proportions that you drew are not the ones you want, you use the arrow tool to correct them. So once you have a base rough sketch that you like, you can go ahead and lower the opacity of that layer and then create a new layer above it. Rename this one to Clean Sketch. So at this stage, what we've done is just draw roughly the proportions and the basic shapes, like I keep saying. And now we're going to go back in and actually find the lines that we do want to use in the illustration. So for example, for the head, you can see I have a bunch of different lines that are not necessarily usable. So all you have to do here is just going back on this new layer to find the actual lines that you want to use. So it's not a super complicated, part of the tutorial in the sense that you already sketched everything, but it's probably the most important part, because if you don't take the time here to really figure out which lines you want to use and to create a strong base for your colors, then it's going to be really hard to make it look good later in the process. So really here, take all the time you need to make your Panda look good. I'm going to stop talking to let you focus, but I'm going to keep my video in the background so you can use it as a reference, and we're going to meet once we have our clean sketch. Awesome! Now we have just one more little thing to do before we start adding the colors, and it's to check our sketch. So for that, at this stage, honestly, if you want, you could hide the rough sketch. I personally like to just keep them both, so I merge the two layers by squishing them with 2 fingers. And then you're going to go back to your arrow tool and you're going to flip horizontally your sketch. So that should show you all the weird things in your sketch. Like for example, you can see on my face, on the Panda's face, it just doesn't look right. So at this stage, you might want to go in the adjustment panel, picking liquify at the bottom, setting your brush to push, and then you're going to play with the size depending on how intense the modifications you need to do are. But that's going to allow you, as you can see here, to just play with your sketch and just make it look a little bit better maybe. So it still doesn't need to be perfect, but that's a really quick way to help you just reshape everything really quickly so that your sketch is in the best shape it can before adding the colors. So feel free here to pause the video to take all the time you need to really fix your sketch, and once you're happy with it, you're just going to flip it back and we're going to start adding the colors. Well, congratulations! The sketch was by far the hardest part of the tutorial, so if you made it this far, you can complete the whole video, I have no doubt about that. So for the colors, all we're going to do is start with a basic silhouette of the Panda. So just create a new layer below the sketch, rename this one to Base, and you need to pick here a color that is almost white, but not quite. If we went in with straight up white, we would not be able to hide lights later, and we want to hide lights. So almost white, but not quite. And since here we're just going to draw the silhouette, you want to use the most basic brush you have. So it could be in the airbrushing panel, the hard brush, making sure that if you watch my watercolor videos, you bring the opacity back up to 100%. Or if you do have the illustration brushes, go ahead and pick the base round brush. And at this stage, it might be helpful to go back and lower the opacity of your sketch layer until you can just barely see it. So all we're going to do here is we're going to outline the Panda. So everything, we're going to create a big outline so that we can later fill it in and create the silhouette. Now this step is really super not complicated, but you want to make sure that you take the time to create a really nice smooth outline. So just take all the time you need here. Again, feel free to pause the video and we're going to meet once we have our clean outline. Once you have your outlines, you probably guessed it, we're just going to fill it in, so dragging the color onto the shape to fill it in and creating our silhouette. And having this silhouette is super helpful because now we can use it as, I guess, a template to help us really quickly add the colors. So for that, we're going to start by creating a new layer above the base but below the sketch, renaming it to black, then tapping on it to open up the menu and selecting clipping mask. Now everything we draw on this black layer is going to stay within the base shape, so that's super helpful. And I know I said we named this layer to black, but we're going to use a very, very dark gray so that we can add shadows later. If we went in with black, we would not be able to do that. Now here in terms of brushes, you could go in the sketching panel picking the 6B pencil, or if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick the basic texture brush. And depending on the vibe you want to achieve in your piece, depending on the look and how much texture you want, there are a few techniques you can use to apply those colors. So you could go ahead and do like I am going to be doing here to create a lot of texture, basically just, coloring in all the different shapes. But you could also outline the shapes and then just drop the color within those shapes, if that makes any sense. So just like we did for the silhouette essentially, but with the dark part. So you could, for example, outline the eye here and then just drop your color. So if you do that, the color drop option, you're going to get texture on the edges of your shapes, but not on the inside. And if you color them in manually, obviously you can see you get a lot of texture. So that's really a question of personal preference. I really do like to have texture in general in my illustrations. I just feel like it adds a lot of details and interest to the piece without necessarily taking a long time. So that's a personal preference again. But if you want to have a smoother look, you can just color drop your color. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave a comment with the word bamboo. If you're new on the channel, you might be like, what's the deal with the secret password? Like, what is that about? Well, it's kind of a game we play here. In every video, I hide a secret password for you guys to find. And not only is it fun, or at least I would think so, but it also gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys. So that's already a win-win. But I think my favorite part about it is, you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you guys are. And whenever you leave a comment, whatever the comment is, I get to see sometimes your face, sometimes your name. And it's just really great to see who's part of the creative community that we're building here on this channel. So just leave a comment with the word bamboo and then we're going to keep going. So once more, I'm going to stop talking to let you focus on filling in your shapes. And once you're done, you can skip to the next chapter. So we're going to take a little break from the Panda. We're going to work on the background real quick and then come back to the Panda. So in order to see the Panda a little bit better to help it separate from the background, we're actually going to work on the background real quick. So it's going to take just a few minutes and then I'm going to go back to the Panda itself. So for the background, the first thing we are going to do is we're going to create a new layer below the Panda base and we're going to rename this one to background light. We're going to use the blending mode color dodge for now, but you can experiment with different ones if you want. And for now, we're also going to leave the opacity at 100%. Now here you're going to use whatever color you want your lights to be on the Panda as well. So here I'm pretending my Panda is outside in the sun, so the light is going to be a super bright yellow. And then you're going to draw some sort of a circle. It really doesn't need to be perfect. Just make sure that the size is roughly, slightly smaller than the Panda. And then you can fill in your circle to create a bright yellow circle behind your Panda. You're then going to go in the adjustment panel, picking Gaussian blur, and with your finger, you're going to adjust the blur. So you're going to swipe it towards the right to add more blur or towards the left to add less blur. So here there's really, again, a question of personal preference. You don't necessarily want to look at how intense the color is, much more about the intensity of the blend. And once you have a blending that you like, you can just lower the opacity of your light until you like the intensity of the light. But now we have a problem. There's light like where the Panda is sitting on the ground, so that doesn't make sense. You're going to set your eraser to the soft brush in the airbrushing panel, pretty big, and then you're going to erase a shadow below the Panda, so just erasing your background light layer is going to create that shadow at the same time. So it should just take a few seconds, but already you can see it looks so much better and we can actually see the Panda contrasting from the background. If you want, you can also create a new layer below the base but above the background light, rename this one to bamboo, going back to color dodge, and with the same color, probably lowering the opacity quite a lot at this stage, maybe 10% or something like that. You can go ahead and just draw kind of silhouettes of bamboos. I was going to call them shadows, but they're actually light, so it It's definitely not shadows. But with the same brush you use for adding your black or gray on the Panda, you can draw rounded rectangles stacked on top of each other, so very, very thin, long rounded rectangles to create different sections of bamboo. So here we're going with a very stylized representation of bamboo, of course, but it does help add a little bit of interest in the background without taking away from the main character. So I personally like to use this kind of silhouette technique a lot, just to give this sense of where the character is without, creating a whole entire universe in the background. So I'm personally going to go with 3 bamboos. You could go with, 1, 3, 5. Ideally, odd numbers just look better in terms of composition. And once you have your very quickly drawn bamboo, seriously, it doesn't need to be a precise thing at this stage at all. You can go back in and in the intersection between the different rectangles, add some very thin, pointy leaves. So those leaves, I like to draw them in groups of 1, 2, or 3, and yeah, kind of alternating side of the bamboo stalk. And as with everything in this video, if at any stage you realize that what you've drawn is not where you want it to be, or the angle you want it to be in, or the size you want it to be in, you can you can always use the arrow tool to reposition the little pieces. Just make sure the bamboos are how you want them to be, but don't spend too much time on them. Maybe I would say a big maximum 5 minutes. Seriously, this is not where you want to spend your time in this video. We have many more things to do, so just draw the bamboo so that they're there, but don't spend too much time. And you can also group your background light and bamboo layers, so just swiping them with one finger towards the right, clicking group option, and rename the group to background. Okay, so let's make this panda actually look good, shall we? So for that, we're going to start drawing the details, outlines, and all those things. And we're going to do that on a separate layer so we can easily, move them around or change them as needed. So just create a new layer above the base and black layer. This one is not going to be a clipping mask, and you can rename it to details. And if you wanted here, you could go with just fully black outlines if that's the style you're after. I like to go with darker versions of the colors the outlines are outlining. So here I'm going to start with a darker version of my gray. It's still not black, but it's very, very dark. And you could use in the sketching panel the 6B pencil. It's just a little bit thicker than the HB pencil, so that would be better for outlines in my opinion. Or if you have the Ultimate Illustration bundle, picking the outlines brush, of course. And at this stage, I'm going to do it in just a few seconds, but you might want to go ahead and set your sketch layer to multiply so you can actually see it over the darker colors. So just tapping on the little N and then selecting multiply. You see then you can see the sketch a bit better. So just adjusting the opacity until you can just see the sketch a little bit, but you don't want it to be too intense, otherwise it's going to be hard for you to distinguish what is the outline and what is the sketch. Now for the outlines, really there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's also a question of personal preference. I personally like to create outlines that are not necessarily super smooth, so I'm not going in with line art quality smoothness. I'm going with sort of a hybrid between line art and sketch. So what I mean by that is my lines are not necessarily going to be the same perfect thickness everywhere, but they are going to be smoother than just sketch line. So every curve, I'm going to try to make it in one stroke, and if I don't like the stroke, instead of erasing one little part and then trying to redraw that little section only, I'm just going to undo and redo the whole stroke itself. So that's just a tip that I know whenever I say it, I can feel you guys rolling your eyes and being like, I want to erase, or at least that's what I pretend in my head. So if it's different, if your reaction is different, let me know in the comments. But it's a tip that is really important to practice and to try and implement, because by doing that, and by that I mean undoing instead of erasing, you are just going to get a lot more smoothness and flow in your piece, which is really important. So yeah, instead of erasing, just undoing, and believe it or not, over time that's going to save you some time. So at first when you start doing that, it might just be a bit cumbersome and it might take you longer, but when you get used to it, that actually takes less time than erasing and then redrawing. So just going over all of the outlines and adding any detail, like if you want spirals on the feet like me, of the panda, but don't touch the nose or the mouth just yet. You can also switch your color if you want, like I was saying, to a darker version of your white. That sounds so strange, but you know what I mean, to outline the head of the panda. Okay, we're at shading now. So that's a fun, exciting part. I know it might be a bit intimidating, but don't worry, we're going to do it step by step and it's going to be totally fine. The first thing we're going to do is create just a scrap layer to draw the light source with a bunch of rays, which is going to help us place the lights and the shadows. Now, if you feel comfortable, you can totally skip that step, that's okay. And then we're going to create a new layer above the black layer. Apply this one as a clipping mask as well so it stays within the base shape. And we're going to rename this one to lights. Usually in my videos we start with the shadows, but I felt like the lights for this one for some reason. So we're going to set this light layer to the blending mode add, and we're going to lower the opacity for now around 50%. And you might want to hide your sketch layer at this stage to get it out of the way. So we're going to go back with the super bright color we used for the background. So in my case, a really nice, vibrant yellow or orange. And here, all you're going to do, well, I mean, honestly, there are so many different ways of adding highlights, but the way I like to do it, and I recommend you do it the same way because it's super easy, but you could do it differently if you wanted to, of course. But all we're going to do is every time a sun ray or a light ray hits one body part, we are going to outline the outline of that body part with the light. So it's a really quick way of adding highlights, which does a few things. It adds highlights, so that's, great. But also really helps the different elements pop from each other. So for example, the ears popping from the background, and then the head and the arms being kind of, it adds contrast. That's what I'm saying. It adds contrast between the different elements. So you can quickly do that. It's not super complicated, and you can do it focusing again on the side of the pieces that are facing your light source. So in my case, the top left of the different body parts are going to be outlined with the lights. But you could also use the strategy carefully though in parts where you just want to create that contrast between different elements. So for example, here the top of the hand and the arm is just all the same color, so although it's not necessarily in the light, I'm going to add some lights there as well. So take all the time you need here, feel free to pause the video. Seriously, it's not super complicated, but it makes a big difference, and you can see already it looks so much better. And you might want to reactivate your sketch layer at the end though to just add the highlight on top of the nose part. So right now we don't have those lines yet because they're going to be animated later, so I'm going to draw them later, but don't forget the lights that should be there as well. And it might be a good idea to hide your light source layer as well, just to kind of double check that everything looks right and reactivate it as needed for the shadows. You can also go back and play with the opacity of your light layer. Mine was way too intense, so just gonna lower it until I like the intensity of it. Seriously, here there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's going to depend on all the colors you use and all those things. And then once you're happy with it, you can create a new layer. This one we're going to rename it to shadow. It's also going to be a clipping mask so that it stays within the base shape. And this shadow layer, you could, if you want, put it below or above the lights layer. I like to put it below, I don't know. I just like it. And we're going to use the blending mode linear burn. And we're also going to lower the opacity for now around 50%. For the shadows, the only recommendation I would have, and you've heard me say that before, is to try avoiding neutral colors. So no neutral gray, no black. Add a little bit of tint. That way your shadows are going to look much more alive and way less muddy than if you were to use just a neutral gray. So for the shadows, we're going to do it in two parts. We're going to start with what is called cast shadow. So for that, you're just going to start from your light source, follow the ray, and whenever a ray hits a body part, for example, the hand and the head here, you're going to draw a shadow below it because the head and the hands are casting a shadow on the body. So that way you're going to have even more definition and differences between the different body parts, and it's also going to start, your piece is going to start looking a little bit more interesting and definitely less flat than it was before. So it's really not complicated. Once more, all you have to do is follow the different rays and then add shadows where a body part is overlapping another, basically. Now, once more, I'm going to stop talking to let you focus, but I'm going to have my video in the background so you can use it as a reference as needed. Otherwise, if you have a different light source than mine, that's great as well. You can experiment and practice placing your shadows using this little technique. Awesome. And just like for the lights, you definitely want to go back and hide your light source layer just to make sure that all the shadows are there. So just double checking everything. And although this looks better, it still looks really, really flat. And the reason for that is right now we only have cast shadows, but there is more than that. For example, you can see the head here is curving away, which means the light at one point is not going to reach this side of the face. And that's not because there is a body part overlapping it, it's just because it's curving away, so the light just cannot reach it. And those are called form shadows. So you can just go over the side of your character that is not facing the light. So in my case, the light source is on the left. So all my form shadows are going to be on the right part of different body parts. And you can really quickly sketch those because we're going to blend them in later. So just roughly placing those shadows in. So to blend them, you're going to go ahead and select the smudge tool, so the little finger icon here at the top. And you can set your brush if you want in the airbrushing panel to a soft brush, which is going to create a super soft gradient. I personally like to keep building some texture, so I'm going to pick in the painting panel the stucco brush. Here, all you have to do is go over the edges of your form shadows, not the cast shadows. The cast shadows, we want them to be really clean and sharp, but we can go over our form shadows and just blending those in so that they create more of a gradient. It doesn't need to be a perfectly smooth gradient, quite the opposite actually, but you want them to be a bit more blended. So that's one difference between cast shadows and form shadows. Form shadows tend to be very, very smooth because they're not created by an overlap, they're just creating by a curve in the form, while cast shadows are very clearly defined. So playing with those is going to really make your piece feel better than if all your shadows were the exact same, so either all blended or all not blended. And I know, that's a rule of thumb. In some light situations, you might have only harsh or only soft shadows, but in general, that's what I like to do, combining both. I think it just looks so much more interesting. And at this stage, you might want to go ahead and group your base, black, shadow, light, and outlines layer in all one clean group. Rename this group to Panda, and then we're going to move on to the animation. You might also want to just delete your light source layer at this stage. Okay, last stretch, we're almost done. We're going to start drawing the missing pieces of the face so that we can later animate them. So for that, create a new layer, making sure that it is outside of the Panda group, and rename this layer to Nose. So for the nose, you can go ahead and reactivate your sketch so you can see where to draw it. And you can go back to the darker color you use for your outline. So almost black, but not quite. And you can stick with the outline or 6B pencil for that. And you're just simply going to draw your nose. And for the nose to not look like just a hole in your Panda, you might want to add some highlights on it. So just picking pure white or the lightest color you use so far. I'm gonna go with pure white. You can just add a few dots of color. And I'm gonna add pure white in the palette, by the way. I forgot about it. So just a little dot and then a little line, and already it doesn't look like a hole anymore. It actually looks like a nose. So we're good for that. We're also going to create a new layer for the mouth, so we want to have the mouth on separate layers so we can easily animate it. And yeah, just a new layer above the nose, renaming it to mouth, and we're going to pick the light color we use for the outline, so just a super light gray. And while you have your light gray, go back on the nose layer to draw this little top nose line. I have no idea how you call it, but just look at the video and you'll know what I'm talking about. And the very last thing we have to draw before starting the animation itself is the bamboo stalk. So go ahead and create a new layer right above the Panda group, below the nose, below the mouth, and all of this, and rename this one to bamboo. Now here, if you sketch the bamboo, reactivate your sketch so you can see it, but honestly, we don't really need a sketch. And you're going to pick a green that is more on the yellow side this time. So the background was more on the blue side, but here you really want a nice, clean, vibrant green. And here we're going to draw all the different elements of the bamboo on that one layer so that it's easy to animate later. So by that I mean the basic silhouette shape, the outlines, and the lights. So for my bamboo, I'm going, as you can see, with a super nice, very simple rounded rectangle for the stalk itself. And then I have 2 leaves poking out of the mouth. In my example, I had 3, so you could go with 3 if you want to. You could go with 1. I just think maybe I prefer 2, honestly. But yeah. And so once you have your silhouette on the same layer, we're going to go with a darker version of our bamboo green, and we're going to outline the stalk and the leaves. And within the stalk, you might want to make sure that you have different sections. So, that's very characteristic of bamboo. So just drawing horizontal, slightly curved line, maybe 1, 2, or 3, depending on the length of the bamboo. And within the leaves themselves, you might want to add a little bit of a middle line as well, just to make them a bit more interesting and less just flat. So you can see super simple, but already it starts looking like bamboo. And the last little thing we need to do here is add the lights. So for that, you can go back to the super bright yellow color you used before, and we're going to draw it directly on the bamboo. Now it's going to look very intense, but that's fine because bamboo is kind of shiny, I guess, definitely more shiny than the Panda would be. So it's okay if the highlights are more intense on the bamboo. So much so that you can also kind of double your line and create some super shiny details on the bamboo itself. Great, so once you have all the different little pieces to animate, we're going to go ahead and activate Animation Assist. So to do that, you just go in the wrench icon menu at the top, and in the canvas option, you're going to activate Animation Assist right here. So it's going to make your file look all weird. That's okay, don't worry, it's part of the process. And it's going to open up this menu here at the bottom. Now, if we click play, sorry for the flashing lights, but it just goes through all the layers and that looks absolutely crazy. So Procreate for animation works with the frame by frame method, I guess. So every layer and every group is going to become a frame, and it's going to play through the frame like a flip book, creating an animation. So knowing that, we're going to go back in our layer panel and we are going to group the Panda and the background together in one group so that it is just one frame. You're going to go ahead and rename this frame to still because this is what we want to be the same in the animation. We don't want to flip through the Panda, we just want to make sure the Panda stays there with the background as well. So in order to keep those there in the background, you can go in your menu at the bottom and activate it as a background. Now, if you have something between the background color and your still layer, or still group, go ahead and delete that or put it above, because in order to activate the background option that you can see here, this group, the still group, needs to be right above the background color layer. If there's anything between them, it's not going to work. So at this stage, if you have your still group set as the background, you can see if you click play, the still group is not going to move, which is what we want, but it's still going to go through and play between the nose and the bamboo. So we're going to group the nose, the mouth, and the bamboo in one group, and we're going to rename that to frame 1. So at this stage, if you've done everything correctly, if you click play, nothing should move because we only have one frame that is going to be part of the animation. The other frame is a still background that doesn't move. So we're going to need to create a new frame. So just go ahead and duplicate your frame 1 group, just swiping it towards the left with one finger and then renaming it to frame 2. If you open up the settings in the animation panel at the very bottom, you're going to see a few options. The first 3 are just for the orders the frame are going to play in. So loop is going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, 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 and then going back to the first one. So that way you create an animation that is looping, but that has some sort of a gap between, the last frame and the first frame. We want a continuous motion. The chewing motion is continuous, so we're going to pick ping pong. Now, frame per second, for now you're going to set it around 5, but we're going to play with that later. Essentially, think of it as the speed of the animation. It's not really true, but we're going to, go with that for now. Now, onion skin frame and onion skin opacity, those don't affect the result of the animation, but it does help you preview what you're working on. So set onion skin frame to 1, and that's going to let you see the frame right above or right below the one you're working with. So that way you're going to know how much you need to move your different elements. So starting in the frame 2 group with the nose layer, you're going to pick your arrow tool and you're going to bring the nose up just a little bit. Like you can see what I was meaning, what I was talking about with the onion skin frame, you can kind of see the nose right below. So that way you can use that as a guide, and if I zoom in, you can see I barely am moving in my node, just a slight little tiny bit of moving upwards, maybe 1 or 2 pixels. And you can see now if we click play, we actually have some sort of an animation. So we're going to go back in the frame 2 group and we're going to make the mouth move as well. So just selecting the mouth layer and going back with your arrow tool. This time the mouth, instead of shifting it upwards, we're going to use the distort option to stretch it a little bit out. So making the mouth longer, I guess. Now here, keep in mind this is a very simplified version of a chewing animation. Like everything else would move on the Panda, the eyes, the face, but this is more of an intro to animation, so we're going to keep it super, super simple. One thing that is going to make a big difference though is if we make the bamboo move as well. So selecting your bamboo layer and with the selection tool, drawing a selection around the bamboo stalk. So not the leaves, really just the stalk. And you're going to slightly rotate your bamboo. So just a tiny bit of a rotation, barely even noticeable. And then you're going to select the leaves and rotate them as well. So the bamboo stalk, you're going to rotate it towards the right and then the leaves towards the left so that they essentially kind of go upwards. And you might need to go back with your eraser to erase a little bit of an overlap that you might create with the stalk and the hand, or maybe the stalk and the mouth. So, you know, at this stage, just make sure that everything looks right. And if you click play, you can see you have a very rough chewing animation. So super simple, takes just a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, but already we can see it starts moving. But it moves in a bit of a boring way, so we're going to create a few more frames to make the animation smoother. So just duplicating the frame 2 group, renaming it to frame 3, and we're going to do the exact same thing. So going back on the nose layer, using the arrow tool to bring it slightly upwards, and then going back on the mouth layer, stretching it outwards to make it a little bit longer, and then selecting the 2 different parts of the bamboo and rotating them so that the bamboo moves along with the mouth. Now this step, you could repeat it how many times you want, so creating how many frames as you want, and the more frames you have and the slightest difference it is, like the smallest the change is basically between the frames, the smoother your animation is going to be. I recommend having at least 3 so that your animation is not just flipping between 2 frames, because that's quite boring. 3, you actually get a bit of variety in the movement. You could go with 4 or 5, that's really up to you and how much time you have. I'm just going to stop with 3 because, you know, you get the gist and the video is already long enough, so we're going to go with that for now. Now at this stage, you can see if you select a loop, it's not really noticeable because we only have three frames, but it just doesn't look right. So we're going to stick with ping pong, but you can go ahead and adjust the frame per second you want, and that's going to affect, as you can see, the speed our Panda is chewing at. I want my Panda to be really chill and slow, so I'm just going to keep it at 5 frames per second. And one more thing you really need to know is before you export it, if you want to share your video on Instagram and Facebook, it needs to be at least 3 seconds long. So all you have to do for that is duplicate your frames until you have enough frames to be 3 seconds. You're probably going to need to reorganize them to make sure they're in the right order. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you know, you get the gist. And in order to know how many frames you need to create, so how many times you need to duplicate your basic animation, all you have to do is take frame per second and multiply that by the length of the video you want. So in my case, I have 5 frames per second and I want at least 3 seconds. So 5 by 3 would be 15. So I would need to create enough groups so I have 15 frames. I'm not going to do that because, again, the video is already long enough, but just make sure that you do that if you do want to use your animations and share it on social media. Once you do have enough layer, you just have to go in the wrench icon menu, selecting the share option, and at the very bottom in the share layer, I know it's a bit strange, you're going to pick animated MP4, making sure that the frame per second you have here is the same as the one you set in the settings. You're then going to be able to click on export, and you're going to have the option to save the video, which is going to save the video in your camera roll with your other pictures and video you have on your iPad. And at this stage, you can go there and just share it on social media as you want. It's just a regular video. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to create more cute illustrations with simple animations like that, I highly recommend you check out this playlist in which I'm going to teach you exactly that. But before you leave, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.